Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Live. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you coming out. This is one of those podcasts where interviewing a candidate that will be that's running for office that certainly could affect us here in Peachtree Corners if they win their seat. So I want to introduce Ruwa Romman. She's running for she's a candidate for Georgia House 97. Hey, Miss Romman, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you. And thanks for having me. How are you?
Sure, good. It's a beautiful day today. Now, this may be streaming on another day, but it's a really nice sunny day. A little cold, but and I think we hit that frost in the morning at about 30, 31 degrees. Uh, but before we get into Rua Roman's campaign and who she is and stuff, let's just say thank you to our sponsor, corporate sponsor, who supports journalism like this, podcasts, and our magazines. And that's EV Remodeling Inc. and Eli, who's a resident here in Peachtree Corners. It's a business based in Peachtree Corners. They do a lot of remodeling. If you're familiar with Houzz, HOUZZ.com, that's a place where you could go online and find out all the latest types of remodeling that's going on. He's part of that. You can check his reviews there. He does a great job here, great corporate citizen and great community citizen as well. So check out evremodelinginc.com. Now that we've gone through that, and of course, Peachtree Corners Magazine and Southwest Gwinnett Magazine supports this endeavor as well. So, Ruwa Roman, you're a Democratic nominee uh, looking to represent this district. In
hmm
fact, District 97 takes up Berkeley Lake, Duluth, Norcross, and Peachtree Corners here in
Yes.
Gwinnett County. And if you're elected, you'd be the first Muslim woman in this Georgia State House as well. Um, Tell us a little bit about you. I know you were raised here in the district practically, I think, right?
I was originally born in Jordan, and my
Okay.
family and I moved to Georgia when I was about 7, 8 years old. And my family established a business actually right here in Gwinnett about 25 years ago, shortly after that. But that meant that, we were trying to settle in, trying to figure out where we wanted to live. So I moved around a lot.
Yeah.
Lived in, Fulton, Forsyth. I was a public school kid, so I was sort of one of the few constants in my life. And yeah, I've essentially lived a majority of my life in Georgia. Went to DC for 3 years to get my master's in public policy and came right back.
And you went to Georgetown University, I think, right?
Yes, I did.
Your background and your studies are in what field?
There what? Sorry.
Your studies and
Oh,
work in.
yeah, for sure. So it's sort of I look back on my journey and it's very interesting because I feel like it builds an arc almost of everything
Mhm.
connecting together. So I after I graduated from high school, I went to Oglethorpe University, which is literally down the street from me. Like if I take a left out of my neighborhood and keep going straight, I'm
Oh,
at my
okay.
university. That's where I met my husband. I worked for several civil rights organizations and nonprofits. So I worked for Points of Light, which was an organization started by Bush Sr. to increase civic engagement. I worked for Care Georgia, which is a Muslim civil rights group. And I worked for the Georgia Muslim Voter Project, which was established to increase civic engagement, particularly in the Muslim community, but
Mhm.
within immigrant communities as a whole. And then I went to grad school, got my master's, and then I worked for a professional management company, which, I don't say the name just because I'm running for office and out of respect
Right.
for them and the corporation. But yeah,
So,
I'm currently working full time for them.
okay. Neat. Um, Going through the public school systems, I got to ask because
Sure.
certainly I'm first generation American in my family. I was born here in Brooklyn, New York. I was born. My parents came from Italy. They're immigrants. Um, Typical immigrant story, right? Four kids in my family. We all grew up. We're all over the country. I mean, one's in Canada even now. But growing up with language and stuff like that on my end was would have should have been easy, but because I was born in the States, but because my family spoke Italian in the household. When
Yeah.
I grew up young, I was speaking Italian and English, almost a Brooklynese, if you will. Um, yeah, it was sad. Uh, they had to bring my mother in to say he needs to learn English and stop
Yeah.
speaking Italian to some degree,
Yeah.
back then. But so being Italian in New York is a lot different. Being Muslim in Georgia is probably a lot different also. So how how does that affect? How did that affect your life growing up? Does that affect your life now?
Yeah, so I'm actually the oldest of four, so it's really interesting that we both
Okay.
had the
Wow.
same number of siblings. Yeah, I'm the oldest
Yeah.
of four. I've got two brothers and a sister.
Okay.
And moving around a lot meant that I was exposed to different types of community.
Hmm.
My mom tried really hard to make sure that we knew our culture. And a lot like you, we didn't speak English at home. I had younger siblings, and my mom felt that it would be unfair that they wouldn't be able to learn. We spoke Arabic at home. So she felt it would be unfair if they didn't know Arabic. So, she would pretend not to understand us, the whole nine yards. And she taught us to
Right.
read and write. So because of her, I'm actually fluent in both English
Oh,
and
wow.
Arabic. Um, but then it was the biggest shift for me. I was kind of oblivious to people's reaction to me. I started wearing a headscarf when I was really young because I really wanted to. My parents were actually really concerned for my safety. They were like, "Please don't, like, just wait until you're a little bit older."
Hmm.
And, I was a stubborn child, for lack of a better way to describe myself. And I said,
Okay.
"Well, my parents said don't do this, so now I'm gonna do this." So I was in middle school when I started wearing my headscarf, and
Oh,
a
wow.
couple years after that, we moved to Forsyth County, Georgia.
Okay.
And Forsyth County, at least where I lived, was very different at the time. I think a lot of people like to paint the South with a broad brush, but that
Mm,
wasn't.
God knows.
It was a little more complicated than that. I was stereotypically, I was one of three non-white kids in my entire eighth grade class, which meant that people had stereotypes about Muslims. They would call me a terrorist. They would point out my house as the bomb lab. But
Oh my God.
yeah, it was not fun.
Yeah. No.
But, and the first Black kid I ever met in Forsyth County was sophomore year of high school. It's very
Oh
different now.
wow.
My sister goes to the same high school that I go to, and her experience is like night and day from mine. But it really taught me a couple of things. One, it taught me that not everybody is militantly hateful. Some people just don't know any better. And if you
Hmm.
give them a chance and you talk to them, you'd be surprised at how open and understanding they can be. Obviously, that wasn't fair for a child to have to deal with, but it really did teach me how to talk to people very different than me and who don't agree with me on anything. And the second thing that it taught me was the importance of knowing who you are, and just really living within your identity. Because I don't think that I could have gotten through all of that sort of bullying and that experience growing up had I not been comfortable in my own skin. And I was very lucky as a kid to have a support system around me that let that
Hmm.
happen. When I say my teachers saved my life, this is exactly what I'm talking about. They were some of the first people to step in when students were being too much, but they did it in a
Mm.
way that um, didn't increase the harm. Instead, they used it as a learning opportunity and teaching opportunity for me and my fellow students of, how can we do this better? Why is this not okay? And truly, it's because of them that I had gotten through that part of my life.
Fortunate. I mean, I believe the school system has a lot of great teachers, but sometimes not. And
Yes.
so I think you were fortunate then that that was the case. Um, and I can see that. I mean, I see it unfortunately in adults that speak about
Mhm.
the Muslim experience and stuff, and they know nothing about the Muslim experience. Not that I know enough, but I feel educated a little bit, at least,
Yeah.
on it. And from coming from an immigrant background and seeing what my parents had to face also, and
Right.
sometimes what I faced even. And people look at me and say, like, you're white, what's the difference? No, no, Rico Figliolini, Italian, people remember The Sopranos from HBO, and I'm like, no, we're not all mobsters, it's okay. So
Well,
there's a bit of that sometimes, right?
exactly. And,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I do wanna say my primary election, I think, was the kind of election that I wanted to have, where it was
Mhm.
very much on the, who's gonna work really hard, what are the policies that matter to the people the most, and we really ran on our merits. Like, I felt like JT and I really ran a good campaign where it stayed clean and we were able to go back to that ideal of what
Mhm.
politics should be. Unfortunately, this time around, that's not what's happening. So we found out this weekend that people in my district received a mailer saying I have ties to terrorism. And, the way I explain it to people is that it's shocking and upsetting, and we have to absolutely respond to it.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's one of those things where unfortunately my threshold is so high that it was just like an extra to-do list on my list to deal
Yeah.
with, right? And to
Right.
explain why we had to deal with it, when I worked for CARE Georgia, CARE Georgia is a Muslim civil rights organization.
And
We
that's spelled CAIR for those that.
Yes, CAIR. Yes, the
Right.
Council on American Islamic Relations.
Right.
I helped start the Georgia chapter. The Georgia chapter didn't exist. I mean, it was kind of there as like a board, but we weren't
Hmm.
offering any services. And I
Okay.
had just graduated college like 2 years earlier. And this was at the time when then candidate Trump was like, we need to, shut down all Muslim immigration. And then a year later signed the first iteration of the Muslim ban. So we weren't sleeping. Like, that's not an exaggeration. There were people who were stuck at airports whose entire lives were upended. And my team and I, brand new team, just started out this organization. We're like in airports translating. There was a grandfather that was trying to, he visited the States multiple times from Syria. Like, this wasn't his first time visiting. But
Hmm.
this one time he actually did need to be here because he needed life-saving cancer treatment that his family was completely paying for. And he was banned. It delayed his treatment and really, really jeopardized his life. So when people say that, she's got ties to terrorism because of that, it shows some pretty intense ignorance because not only has CARE been investigated because of these conspiracy theories, we
Hmm.
actually had anti-Muslim groups infiltrate the organization and put people on our payroll who were eventually outed like 13 years later because we were so boring and they couldn't find anything on us. Like, it
No
was your
way.
typical like nonprofit drama, like office stuff and whatever, but
Hmm.
it wasn't exciting. It wasn't what they were looking for. And so they actually outed the guy earlier this year because they're like, we're not getting anything juicy off of them. This is useless. So but again, I do wanna go
Yeah.
back to the point about why we responded to it. It's because,
Right.
1, network is really important, good work, and 2, my life was put in danger. We didn't have an office. And so at the time, it was pretty easy to find where I lived and who I was, and I was targeted by an armed militia. We all were. We
Really?
were put on, like, multiple hit lists. Like, this wasn't, again, I was a
Is
very
that
young,
is that
so
something that was reported to the authorities? I
yeah,
mean,
I had a
how do you know you were
yeah.
on multiple hit lists?
So we had a GBI agent. Each of us was assigned a GBI, a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent,
Hmm.
who anytime we received a threatening phone call or voicemail or whatever the case may be, we had to submit it to them. So each of us basically had a file of just threats that were, accumulating over that year and a half.
How long ago was that, or was that
So
recent?
this was 2015, and it continued until I went to my graduate program, or maybe 2016. 2016 until I
Okay.
went to my graduate program.
Okay.
Even when I went to DC, I was still getting the phone calls until about 2018. So it was about 2 years of just like constant, my social media was always full of comments. My
Hmm.
emails were always full of comments. Our inbox were always full of comments, which is, again, quite unfortunate because like every organization, we were dealing with having to provide services for the people that needed
Right.
them. We were dealing with their typical office stuff of like
Hmm.
how to properly set up as an organization, what strategy works best, all of those typical things. And on top of that, I'd call my GBI agent and be like, hey, I just got another one. Here you go. So,
Wow. It's now just to let people know. I mean, obviously, when I interviewed John Chan, your opponent in this race
mhm.
um, for the '97, because there's no incumbent for this seat. This seat is a brand new seat.
Yeah, it was
Correct.
actually mostly Beth Moore's old district and then
Correct.
part of
Right.
Bonnie Rich's old district. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's new.
So it's brand new. So John Chan was a guest. For those that haven't seen the episode, you should probably look at it. Uh, Running also for the seat, and towards the tail end of that interview, he mentioned that you were part of CARE Georgia, which is recognized, according to him, as a terrorist organization. I think it was by Syria or by some foreign country. I forget which country
So yeah, he said the UAE designated us as
UAE. That was
yeah.
it. Sorry,
He said
sorry,
yeah.
Syria.
No, no,
UAE. That
no,
was
no,
it.
you're good. He said the UAE designated us as a terrorist organization, which
Right. That was it.
last I checked, we live in the US. The UAE is not a civil rights friendly country.
No,
So it's
by far.
surprising
Yeah.
that they would want
Yeah.
to designate a civil rights organization as a terrorist
Right.
organization.
In fact, before this interview, I went online. Anyone can go online and go search. I did
Of
not
course.
find anything disparaging about CARE Georgia on
Mhm.
there or the organization.
Well,
Um, so,
yeah. What you'll find, by the way, I really care about internet literacy and mis and disinformation. There are literal think tanks whose entire for a while, it was like a $300 million industry to increase fear about Muslims in America.
Mhm.
And they literally would fundraise off of let's find the terrorists among us. And we'd see
Right.
these. Like it was truly like that's how they would fundraise. And they went after everyone. I mean, they went after Care Georgia. They went after an organization called Islamic Relief, whose literally
Mhm.
only job is to feed and house poor people. Like that's truly all that they do. Um, and they like I think there was a comment on the last podcast that was like, I can link to everything that John Chan mentioned today. And so I went to look at the organization that she cited. And the first
Mhm.
thing about it that you read is that it's an anti-Muslim think tank. And I lived in DC. I know
Mm.
these think tanks. I know how they operate. I know how they're
Okay.
structured. We know how this stuff works. But unfortunately, for a typical person who's reading, they don't
Right.
know that, right? They never walked down K Street. They never saw like what these buildings look like or who these people are.
Mm-mm.
They're just people sitting behind their
Yeah.
computer just
And there's no
posting what they want.
right. There's no transparency about who funds them and such.
Well,
Which is a bad thing,
mhm,
because anyone could be funding anything secretly through
exactly.
third-party corporations into a PAC or a think
Yep.
tank, even.
Mhm.
Um, all right, good. So I just want to make sure we got that out of the way, and
Appreciate you.
now,
No, you're good.
well,
Thanks.
cool. So now let's get on to some real issues. I think that will matter as far
Right.
as
And
if
that's the
someone wants to vote for either one of you, so this way they can see
right.
where you
And
guys sit.
stuff like this detracts from the issues. We have so much
Yes.
happening in our communities, and I'm like, we don't have time for this. But anyway, I
Yes.
digress. But
Yes. Just, it's the economy, stupid. So anyway, um, so let's start with education.
yeah,
Let's go there first. Okay. So I know that education is on your website, one of the first items someone will look at and see. And you talk about teachers, you talk about reinvestment in schools and stuff. So
mhm,
tell us a little bit, about because this is of the biggest budget in education. It's 50% of Georgia's budget, according to
mhm,
your website.
mhm.
And I know we rank. Everyone knows, and we hear the stories that we rank 38 at the bottom, maybe even lower, depending on how you actually look at that statistic. So tell us a little bit about what your campaign would like to see and
Yeah.
how, in practical purposes, what you would specifically suggest
Yeah,
to do.
I firmly believe that teachers are the cornerstone to our education system. I think technologies come and go. I think teaching methodologies evolve over time, but the ones that stay, the ones that are in that building the longest, are truly our teachers, and that's why I really do stress paying them better, because we really don't pay them well. And one of my favorite things that I learned recently is that Georgia has a multi-billion-dollar budget where we could give teachers an $11,000 raise tomorrow and not raise a single cent in taxes.
Hmm.
$11,000, and it wouldn't be a one-time bonus, like Governor Kemp did. It would be a consistent raise that would stay over time. And that's truly one of the first things because we're losing teachers at a rate that is just astonishing. I know that because they're coming. I know some teachers that are actively applying to my company. We've seen an influx of teachers that want to just get out of the profession completely and not just go to a different school, which tells us that it's not like a particularly bad administrator or administration. It's the profession itself. But if you invest in teachers and you invest in that pipeline, that means a couple of things will happen. One, you're able to retain teachers better. Two, you're able to then recruit more teachers to decrease classroom sizes. And three, the students now get more attention from their teachers. Um, but also, the reason I'm so stuck on public schools isn't just because of my personal experience, but also what that personal experience looked like. A good chunk of my public education was in Forsyth County. I had access to 5 different magnet programs. One of them, and not all of them were like STEM and STEAM and stuff like that. One of them was a culinary program. One of them was a robotics program. One of them was a career-based program. And it was all within a public school system that every child had access to, regardless of their income level. And that's what I want for students. It's not that I'm saying one size fits all and let's just throw money at the problem and it'll go away. What I'm saying is that if you invest in your people, they are and can be very innovative and can give
Mhm.
students the kind of opportunities that I had, which was truly an incredible education.
The Peachtree Corners itself, and Norcross, and the parts that you represent if you were elected. I mean, we have good schools here, right, to a degree. It varies, obviously, depending. Peachtree Elementary, Norcross Elementary, you
Yeah.
have, although you also have the IB program at Norcross. You have Paul Duke STEM High School, which is not a testing school. You don't have to test to get into that school. So
Mhm.
it's a school that you can attend and get into STEAM, and also allows, in that particular case, kids to learn like 3D printing, coding, and actually graduate and possibly get a job right out without going to college.
Yes.
Um, so what? So paying more. I know. Listen, Kemp has done the refunds, the state refunds to families and stuff, which is a good thing.
Yes.
Um, but everyone can debate on where to put that money.
Hmm.
And education certainly would be it. I know that Gwinnett County has empty slots and they can't fill it. I mean, probably because they can't get enough applicants actually into
Hmm.
it. So I mean, yes, more pay would be helpful,
Yeah.
but what else do you think should be done there?
Yeah. So I love when people ask me what else because a lot of things I talk about are multi-prong approaches.
Hmm.
So you also have to look at the sort of teacher pipeline as a whole. In order to become a teacher, you have to become certified. There are a lot of hurdles to becoming fully certified. Some of it financial, some of it just a support system for people as they're going through their education.
Hmm.
And there are grant and student loan forgiveness programs for teachers that I think if we were able to like reduce the timeline of those for people to see that payback of it a lot faster, we would see a lot more people entering this profession versus now where I get the student loan forgiveness program is there, but it's 10 years. And when you're a kid
Right.
who decided to become a teacher and you're constantly paying this loan, even though it is adjusted for your income, it's still an extra expense.
Hmm.
What if we did a 5-year loan forgiveness? Because then that teacher pay isn't as intense for them to feel, especially in a rising where everything is rising in cost, would
Hmm.
be really great. Additionally, is there a way to like have people working maybe under a mentorship program or something so that the certification requirements are adequate enough that they are able to be good teachers, but they're not
Right.
cumbersome? Like, are we asking
Okay.
for too much based on the level of like based on the level that a teacher is teaching? How much certification do they actually need?
Right.
Um, what are these schools offering, especially some of our public universities, within their education? Are there classes that they're taking that they don't have to be taking, that they can save time and money on and get them into the
Mm.
classrooms more? But it really does come down to respect. I think that the other piece of this, so money, the pipeline itself of like the educating our teachers, but then
Right.
also how we treat our teachers. I had mentioned this
Hmm.
during the Peachtree Corners debate. I have watched the disrespect and the harassment and the threatening of teachers that has increased over the past year, year and a half, some maybe two. We need to stop that. Period. It is a cultural shift that needs to happen, and we need to actively call it out and support our teachers. And it needs
Well,
to come from our state legislatures.
okay. Are you seeing that mainly from parents or parents and kids?
It's sort of one of those things where, and I want to be clear, most parents are awesome. Like the parents I'm
Hmm.
seeing are very supportive of teachers, but there's a very small but vocal minority that is doxing teachers, that is
Hmm.
calling for surveilling teachers, and
Right.
of course that's gonna permeate to their students, right? If you're a kid and your parent is constantly talking badly about your teacher, you're more
Hmm.
likely to disrespect your teacher in the classroom. You're more likely to misbehave in the classroom. You're less likely to listen to your teacher, whether as an authority figure or as someone to teach you. And
Right.
so we need to change this culture that we have as politicals, as a whole, by the way, across the board,
Hmm.
of talking to teachers more, respecting them more, and treating them like the professionals that they are.
Okay. Cool. Um, yeah, I agree with you on most of those points. It's a tough profession. I
Mhm.
can't see being one of them. I wouldn't have the patience for it.
Me neither.
Um, yeah, that's a tough thing. Economic opportunity. We have a
Yes.
tremendous amount of inflation
Mhm.
right now. Interest rates have gone higher. Gas is going a little higher. I mean, that's a fluctuating thing. Um, but there's still, and unemployment is low, and it's ridiculously low, and to the point where businesses, like, where was I just now? I was I went to a local gas station that's fairly new, and they just opened. And I went to gas up. I went to go into the convenience part, which is brand new, beautiful looking. Couldn't go in. There was no
Yep.
staff.
Yep.
They just couldn't hire anyone, I guess. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's just crazy. So how can an estate level, I mean, we're
Yeah.
feeling that in Norcross. I constantly, when I go to Dunkin' Donuts, they don't have enough employees. When I go to town center and I see a sign in the window that literally says $15 an hour, where they would never put out
Mhm.
that sign. How can the state help local cities
Yeah.
combat that and other issues?
Yeah. So, again, with my multi-pronged approaches, and sorry for my
Mhm.
dog, she's excited.
No, you're good. You're good.
We had one of the we need to talk about the facts first and foremost. The fact is that 1 million people died of COVID and millions more are disabled because of complications from COVID. The reason I know that is because I'm experiencing long-term COVID symptoms. None of my blood levels are normal. Every time I go to the doctor's office, like something new. So it's real and it's impacting people. And a lot of the jobs that you mentioned are very strenuous jobs. On my campaign, we're offering 17.50 an hour to canvas. We're actually working to up that to 20 for the last couple of weeks, hoping to get like a grant for it. But even still, that is not enough for a lot of people. And I don't think any of us expected this kind of lower unemployment rate because we thought, "Oh, the economy is struggling, so therefore, X, Y, and Z." But it's also
Right.
important to recognize that a lot of these local stores, some of them are corporations, of course, but a lot of these
Mhm.
mom and pop stores are competing with large corporations. These large corporations can offer healthcare, they can offer benefits, in
Right.
a way that a small business cannot afford. And in a place like Georgia, and again, I've lived in DC, it's uniquely bad and expensive on healthcare. So if a mom and pop shop wants to compete with a company to hire people, it just simply can't afford to because healthcare is so expensive. And we're leaving billions of dollars on the table in Medicaid that you and I paid for in our taxes that could really help ease that burden and bring down some of those private insurance costs that we're seeing. And that's one way that we can help mom and pop shops compete because then they can offer a benefit they can afford to then bring back some of those people from the private corporations.
Mm.
But we also need to think a little bit more long term about, again, our students, our education system, our future generations, so that they are equipped to enter the workforce, maybe even faster, but making sure they can have a living wage if they do leave school early, because that's the unfortunate part. If you have a high level of education, you tend to be paid very high. So we also need to fix that disconnect of we want more people in the labor force, but we also want them to be able to afford to live. And so how can we, like you said, those apprenticeship programs, those
Mhm.
um, my sister currently, which I didn't do in high school, but I think it's really cool. 2 of her days in high school now are working at a clinic. She gets an opportunity to get real world experience as a high schooler before
That's
she
cool.
even graduates. So there are ways that we can think about this creatively, but we also, again, for me, it's all about the safeguards, right? Like making sure that kids aren't being exploited, that they're getting these opportunities, and that we're fixing this labor problem at the same time by sort of having people, or at least mom and pop shops, be a little more competitive, increasing the labor market, because a lot of people are about to retire, and I don't think we're ready
Right.
for that.
Right. I think people retired during COVID even because
Mhm.
they found that this is the perfect time. Let's just get out of it.
Yep.
Um, but I appreciate the apprenticeship program idea because I see that in Europe. I see companies now large companies like
Mhm.
Bosch and some other companies beginning
Right.
to talk about that. Because not every kid can go to college. Not every kid wants to go to college. Not every kid can strive through 4 years of college and then come out. I mean, I've seen kids come out with a degree and then not do the work in that degree. I mean, so what's the point? If you could come out of a school through an apprenticeship program and making
Mhm.
70, 80,000 possibly even,
Right.
like HVAC or electrician or plumber, there are definitely jobs like that.
Yeah.
And they can't get enough people, it seems. So, do you see the state being able to step in to some degree to help with those types of
Yeah. So
apprenticeship
the state,
programs?
yeah, the state, there were a few pilot programs that started as early that I know of in 2015.
Mhm.
The problem with the pilot programs was we didn't put proper safeguards in place so that students were being pushed to leave the apprenticeship program early, and then they were
Mm.
stuck in a lower income bracket because the company that they were on offered them like $12 an hour, which to them was a lot of money. And then they grew up and they wanted to buy a house and wanted to start a family and realized, oh,
Right,
shoot, I can't live on my high school pay anymore. And so we need
right.
to make sure that if a company wants to take advantage of those apprenticeship programs, that they commit to allowing students to finish their degree in full before they
Mhm.
pull them out. Or because apprenticeship programs come with certificates and
Right.
degrees and stuff that you can then take with you to other companies and be able to shop around for a job. And so that's
Mhm.
that's a very important piece that I don't think we have fully invested in because it a lot of people were like, oh, this might not be great for my child.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think there's different problems in different states, right? New York State has a lot of unions, which is
Mhm.
not a bad thing, but can be a bad thing. So it can be a detriment or an impediment, depending on how you look at it. And it can be good. Georgia doesn't, right? Georgia's a right to work state or work at will state, depending
Right.
on how you technically want to call it. So I agree with you. I mean, everything needs, I believe in free market, but you have to make sure there's oversight because people will take advantage. Totally. Um, Healthcare, you mentioned that before about affordable and accessible healthcare. So the state of Georgia is not part of um, accepting the expanded Medicare system. I mean, I can understand part of that reasoning, even though the federal government will pay for 90% of that cost, at least for the first few years or first 2 years. And then after that, the state will have to pick that up. We can't pay for everything. We can't do $11,000 increase in pay for teachers and then do this and that. So,
Right.
how do we handle healthcare?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about our current surplus is that the amortization, I can never say that word, but the rate on
Yeah,
it actually would replenish the fund even as we use it. And that's the nice thing the thing is we have a real opportunity in Georgia right now. These surplus funds came mostly from ARPA funds and other pieces of
hmm,
legislation that President Biden had signed into law recently. So we have a windfall and a real opportunity to invest in our people. And it's not, no one is saying that we can pay for everything tomorrow. But the idea is that if we have this opportunity, we're able to make these investments now for a better future without raising taxes and that are sustainable and long term. Why wouldn't you? And that has been my question over and over and over again is this is a moment where we can really fix a lot of these problems we've been having in Georgia. I would say that have gotten worse since 2008.
mm,
But our rainy day fund is fully funded. All of our budget items are fully funded, and we still have this surplus. So on the issue, and again, this is something that I think a lot of people, I appreciate and understand that we do live in sort of a capitalist society and a free market system. But healthcare is not something that can be controlled by the free market because it's an inelastic good. I can't, if I had diabetes, I can't just decide not to purchase insulin because it's too expensive. That's
right.
not an option for me because I will die. It is that simple. And so when we treat healthcare as a
Mhm,
typical market good, we end up with a lot of market inefficiencies. I do understand economics because I spent a good chunk of my public policy learning
mhm.
economics, which I think a lot of people think, oh, she's just a kid and she's idealistic and oh, she's very cute. But no, I know the principles I'm talking about.
Right.
I just don't share the values of people should die because they couldn't afford insulin, which by the way, um, Medicaid is just one solution, right? Again,
Hmm,
I like to talk about multi-pronged approaches.
hmm.
Georgia's also bad on public health. We don't teach our people when to go to the emergency room versus their primary care doctor versus an urgent care. And that causes a lot of strain on our hospitals that is exacerbating the closures. So if somebody needs insulin, they're probably better off going to an urgent care clinic than they are going to an emergency room. But what would be even better is if we could give them insulin, right? If
Right.
we could give them an inhaler for their asthma so they're not ending up costing thousands of dollars instead of whatever the cost of the medication is.
Absolutely.
So,
But hospitals have to accept there are people without insurance, right? I forget what the number here is in the state of Georgia. So you can't go to an urgent care likely or a doctor maybe because you feel you might not you'd have to pay there for sure. Whereas a
right,
hospital has to take you. Although depending on which hospital you go to, they may also shift you out.
right, right.
And they're not allowed to, but that people that don't know that don't know
Oh,
that.
of course. And we're talking about
So,
tiers of people, right? Like if the people who
right.
have insurance, instead of going to the emergency room all the time, they went to these other doctors, then that's
Hmm.
one less group of people in the emergency room, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. But then again, if you have a public healthcare option that people have access to,
Hmm.
then they don't even go to the emergency room at all because they have access to insulin. And, if we're going to really have a serious conversation about the market, having a public health option that is competitive in the market forces
Hmm.
health insurance companies to stop price gouging. Because
Oh
again, we
yeah.
don't really have choice in health. We have the illusion of choice
Yeah.
in health insurance,
Yeah.
but they've all consolidated into like two or three companies, I think now. I mean, they've got like
Hmm.
subsidiaries, but that's not choice to me. They're literally running amok with the market and doing whatever they
Oh.
want to do, and no one is stopping them.
Agreed, agreed. I know someone that's going for a diagnostic mammogram. I think it's called a
Mhm.
screening mammogram, actually. There's different levels of that, right? So I saw the sheet, and there's no pricing on it. There's no price
Mhm.
transparency. The interesting part, though, we know how much it costs. It actually costs less going and paying a cash out of pocket than if you
Right,
went with your insurance in hand. I'm like, now why is that? Why does
right,
it cost less for me to pay out of pocket, let's say, versus going through the insurance, and then you see when they send you the explanation of benefits, it's like a horrendous amount. It's like, but
right,
that's not your bill, but it is your bill because in a way you're going to end up paying it.
right.
It's
Why
just
did a Band-Aid cost me, what was it,
yes,
$200 the other day kind of thing, so, yeah.
it's ridiculous.
Yep,
Um, let's go on to this. Want to run out of time. So let's try crime and safety. So
sure.
public safety, community safety, that's the new phraseology used, community safety, because it's not just about public, I guess. It's about how we keep our communities safe. So here in Peachtree Corners, we had a really, I mean, there are things that happen, shootings at extended stay hotels and other places. And there was a shooting at the QT not too
Yes.
long ago, if you may remember that. Um, Three perpetrators tried to do a carjacking. Um, the kid, 29-year-old that used to coach, I think, at Norcross High School, um, didn't want his car jacked. And it was on Peachtree Parkway, really busy intersection. And I think for a lot of people, a wake up call to like, it's not just other places, it happened here.
Right,
Now those three were found within a month. I think all three of them were arrested, and I guess they're going to be fully prosecuted. Supposedly, we'll find out when that goes. But part of it was technology was being used.
mhm,
Fusus is a Peachtree Corners company that does crime center in the cloud computations and uses algorithms and video cameras and such. They're one of many companies, right? They're
mhm,
based here. Those three were found because of some of these efforts using technology to track people to be able to find them. I know there was a point of people wanting to defund the police. Do they need a armored vehicle carrier to bring the people in? I don't know. But how would you work? How should the state work with local cities to
yeah,
make sure that technology can be used because it's effective,
yeah,
um, and to be able to look at how the police operate also in a social environment, where maybe police aren't needed and maybe a social worker is needed or a social professional is needed, maybe
yeah,
even in concert with the police officer. Because I wouldn't want to send someone out to a domestic disturbance by themselves without a police officer, because
right,
those things can turn deadly.
yeah.
Um, so how would Roman handle this as a state house rep?
I do want there's a couple things I wanna say here about this
Yeah,
conversation, and then I wanna talk about my solutions.
sure.
One of the things that has been very upsetting to me around conversation about public safety and crime is it has almost felt like, some people have been giddy that that shooting happened because then they can
Yeah.
go, "Oh my god, crime, Democrats, and defund the police." Somebody died
Hmm.
that day,
Yeah.
and the lack of sensitivity around that conversation, frankly, has been very upsetting to me. It's also important to note, like you said, that the perpetrators were apprehended pretty
Hmm.
quickly, and
Yes.
that's due to investment by our county commissioners, who are all Democrats, by the way, none of them are defunding the police,
No.
um, that are supporting law enforcement in a way that does increase public safety.
Hmm.
Um, So I'm really glad you mentioned it that way because while it is scary and terrifying, I mean, I've always gone to that QT. The Forum Mall was like one of the first malls I ever went to as a kid, right? You hang out with your
Right.
friends, it's supposed to be a safe space. But
Yeah.
we need to look at public safety holistically from a prevention and a response perspective, like you said. So, a lot of these extended stays, what can we do to make sure that people have affordable housing, including first responders, by the way? A lot of first responders can't afford to live where they're serving. That's not good for
True.
public safety and doesn't increase trust. The
True.
second piece of it, like you said, is mental health and social workers that are useful that do have to be escorted by police officers. Like I said, my husband's a part-time first responder, and if it's a shooting scene, police always go and clear the scene before they're able to support anyone that's been hurt. So
Hmm.
that's like again a holistic approach. At the same time, we have to make sure that we are focused on community and public safety in a way that doesn't increase harm. And what I mean by that is you mentioned the technology, you mentioned how there are these really awesome and cool um, tools that we have in our back pocket that we can apprehend criminals. We also need to make sure that our privacy is continued to be protected. And this is coming from me as a woman, right? If I
Hmm.
go to my OBGYN tomorrow and that OBGYN happens to also provide abortion as a service, do I then become a suspect for the state based on our new laws? Even if I'm not pregnant, even if I'm not whatever, how can we make sure that those safeguards are in place so that we can adequately respond to crimes while making
Right.
sure that completely innocent law-abiding citizens aren't ensnared in that system of suspicion that only the wealthy are able to get out of quickly, and be able to overcome. The other piece, and I
Hmm.
know I was attacked on this recently, I think, I'm not really sure, on cash bail, was our prisons and jails are overflowing, especially our jails. And it's because nonviolent offenders can't afford to pay their bail, even if they didn't. This is only people who've been charged of a crime, they haven't been convicted of a crime. And I had a friend the other day tell me they work for like an ankle monitoring business company type thing. They
Right.
said that they had to put an ankle monitor on a murder suspect because they didn't have space in jail to hold that person. And they know for a fact that the people in that jail are
Hmm.
non-violent criminals, that they could be let out with those ankle monitors instead, but they just can't afford it. And so when you
Right.
put money and tie it that closely to freedom, it doesn't make any of us safer. In fact, it's actually putting a lot of us more in danger. So going back to that holistic approach that I always like to talk about,
Right.
it's support our first responders better, and I think I would add
Mhm.
social workers to that term as well. Increase their certification along with that increase in pay, so that there aren't any bad actors in that type of workforce and field. And two, how do we support these new technological innovations while protecting innocent average everyday citizens? And three, educate the public on, you know, how to be a part of that community safety approach of how do we care for one another? How do we look out for one another? I think is sometimes something that we don't always talk about.
Yeah, true. I think that depending on the community and outreach, you find a lot of that from the faith institutions, reaching
Yeah.
out, providing services, jobs, how to find a job to people
Yeah.
that may not know how to find a job. So there's a lot of that going on in certain communities. There's more than in other communities sometimes.
Yeah.
I agree with you on the privacy. I think technology is moving faster
Mhm.
than legislation can catch up with. And right, and unfortunately, there are legislators that are older than me out there that don't even understand the technology and what the privacy issues. It's a very complicated, right? It's very complicated. There's a lot of gray areas. I know the idea of cashless bail. People are like, no, no, that's bad. And you get a TikTok video of someone that smashed someone to the ground and now they have a brain injury and it's a misdemeanor. And why are they on bail or cashless bail? Well, that's just bad judgment call. You
Right.
know, some of it has to just be like the
Yeah.
judge has to realize there has to be some latitude in what's done, right? So, I
Right.
mean, it's everyone picks the extreme of a problem
Exactly.
and say that's the problem. So, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Thank you.
Um, and I like the fact that multi-prong is important because it's not a black and white thing. It's not
I'm a
one
nerd like
decision.
that. Yeah. I tend to geek
Yeah.
out on policy because I'm like, you got to address the whole
Yeah.
thing, not just
Yes.
bits and pieces of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I love talking shop. Um, so let's try voting rights because that's a big thing
Yes.
for me too.
Mhm.
Um, because sometimes when I have to pay by check, I have to show an ID.
Sure.
When I go pick up drugs, I have to show an ID. There's some things I have to show an ID for. And I fervently believe voting, when I go to vote, I should show my ID. That makes sense. Now, what that ID is can be, it's a government ID or your driver's license or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but, I believe that if we're going to enforce that we should
Mhm.
actually make it as easy as possible for these people to get their IDs.
Right.
If that means, drop it off by DoorDash or something, then that's good. It's all right, because as long as you do the
Yeah.
initial thing
Yep.
and you have a picture and you have a fingerprint and you say, you're ID'd, you're good to go, right?
So,
Um,
yeah.
so how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So full disclosure on this, I actually did my master's was on voter ID laws and voting in
Mhm.
general. And I looked at every single county in the 48 contiguous United States to look at the impact of voter ID laws.
Right.
One of the most interesting things about my findings is that it wasn't necessarily the voter ID law itself that reduced turnout, which by the way, I used like some of the strictest models I could. We were all shocked that my findings were, to get really nerdy, like statistically significant in the fact that there's
Mhm.
a negative correlation between voter ID laws and turnout. Um, but the caveat and the nuance there is the type of voter ID law that was implemented. So
Oh,
in other states, what they do is they have voter ID laws, but they
right.
also allow somebody who goes to vote to prove their identity in a different way. They can sign an affidavit. They can look them up in an already existing system. There are so many different ways that somebody can prove their identity right then and there so they don't leave and can't come back to vote that
Mhm.
doesn't prevent them from voting. And that's the biggest piece of nuance I
Good.
think that a lot of people miss on the voter ID laws is nobody is nobody is saying that we shouldn't verify who is voting. That's like 101, like you got to trust but verify, right?
Right.
But one of the billions of ballots that researchers in this field have looked at over time, there has been no voter fraud. And when there has been voter fraud, it's immediately been found, and none of it has ever flipped an election. Period. Those are facts. I get that we live in a society where I can write whatever I want on the internet, but
Mhm.
there are people who study this, and they have been looking at this in a way way deeper than I can in a quick Google search.
Right.
And so you're right. There are ways to write these laws where we're securing our elections
Mhm.
without preventing people from voting. One of them is making sure they get IDs. That's what they do in Mexico. Mexico has a very strict ID law, but they
Mhm.
ensure that every citizen in Mexico gets an ID to the point that they have
Right.
like the equivalent of census takers, kind of like what
Mhm.
we saw during the census.
Mhm.
Their only job is to deliver IDs. They literally go
Mhm.
to the highest mountains, to the deepest slums, like
There you go.
their
That
job.
right, and
So,
that's what we should be doing too. Then, if we're going to be forcing that, and I like the idea of multiple ways to validate someone's identification
right.
using other means, but that also means the state would have to step in to some degree. We're a county by county, right? Every
Mhm.
county uses their own election thing, whatever they want to use, whether it's a ballot receipt or a scanned ballot or whatever it is. There's too many ways to do this from county to county
Right.
that it becomes difficult unless you're going to be able to make some sort of broad ID that's accepted by every county, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Which exists, like, that's what the driver's license system is, and county
yes.
officials do have access to those records, by the way. So
Right.
it wouldn't so during my day job, I've got various clients. A lot of them are federal agencies, and,
Hmm.
some of this stuff really is just technological, supply chain process, boring stuff that you just need
Yeah.
to put in some time, effort,
Yeah.
and, yes, funding into, but it makes life so much easier in the future.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. So I agree with you on most of your points there. That there's a lot of valid places,
Mhm.
valid ways to be able to say who you are.
Yeah.
And the only thing I have is that I've been out of Brooklyn, New York, when I was part of the Democratic machine. Um, became a became a Reagan Democrat later, but in New York, and most anyone that's listened to me often enough knows, I worked for Chuck Schumer when he was a congressman early on for a year, just doing constituency work, but
Right.
worked in politics. People should be more afraid of how votes are suppressed.
Mhm.
You know, people's rights are taken away, not physically, but just by mailings. of
Yeah.
if you get slammed with enough mailings, you become so immune to it that you're like, I don't even want to go vote.
Yeah.
I know lots of young kids that don't even, they 5 years into their voting ability, and not yet, and not once have they gone to vote.
Yeah.
Um, so there's so many other ways to get people to not to vote, and that's voter ID is not really one of them.
You're speaking to
Um,
my heart here. I mean, it is, I always tell people, a lot of people say, what's the point of getting politically involved? And I remind them that there have been races, like in Virginia, the state
mhm,
legislature stayed Republican for an extra 2 years because of a coin toss, the equivalent of a coin toss. Like it was a tie and they had to break the tie. And, we have our city council race up here in Duluth was decided by 4 votes. So,
right.
I have a hard
Yes.
time believing that this doesn't matter, but you also got to build political
Yeah.
power during off the year so that if somebody, including me, doesn't
Hmm.
do what you elected them to do, you're able to vote them out and get a better person in.
Yes. And people love to complain, and I love to say, well, if you haven't voted, then, and I know people get tired of that, but you know what? If you haven't voted, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't want to hear you. It's like that type of thing. Because, and then people say, well, it doesn't mean anything. But those 4 votes in Duluth
It
meant
matters.
something, right? Could have been something else.
Yeah.
There's so many other issues we could talk about.
I know.
And we're running into 50 minutes right now, almost an hour.
You're good.
And I do want to give you an opportunity to say, you know, to ask for that vote. Um, is there a particular burning issue that we haven't touched on that you want to spend a couple of minutes on?
This is sort of a very meta issue, I think. But I
Okay.
really want to encourage listeners and voters to reach out to their candidates and hear from
Hmm.
them directly. I know that trust me, I know a lot of money goes into marketing. I have to fundraise for it. I get it.
Hmm.
But my number is on our website. My email's on our website. If you leverage that, I will respond to you. And the reason I say that is we live in a digital age where anyone can write anything and send out anything that they want with little to no consequence. And as you saw even during this podcast, we had to spend the beginning of it dispelling a rumor that someone took 5 minutes to write and say. And that kind of stuff really does detract from the real issues. And I think I would hope as constituents, as people who care about our society, that we start to more critically think about some of the things that are being sent to us. So I think
Hmm.
the one rule of thumb that I've started to implement for myself is if somebody tells me about a problem and is only scaring me about it and they're not offering me a solution, then they're
Right.
not gonna fix it. They just want to fearmonger me into a vote.
Yeah.
Um, and so please think about the world around us. How much control does the person that is leveraging this issue actually have on that issue? And ask those critical questions of them. Again, I have solutions and ideas. I think that with my expertise and everything, I can do a lot of good in this work. But I'm
Hmm.
also not naive, and I know my limitations. And I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver kind of thing. And so,
So let's
yeah,
go right into
yeah,
you then.
no,
Let's
yeah,
let's go right into you asking for the vote. Then might as well let's go right there. So I'm
my
going
cat came by.
mine, they're sleeping around me. They're dozing off.
That's
Um, so why don't you
awesome.
ask for the vote and
Yeah.
tell people where they can find you?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my name is Ruwa Romman. I'm running for Georgia State House District 97. You can find out more about me at Ruwa, RUWA, the number 4, Georgia spelled out.com. So ruwaforgeorgia.com. There you will find a form that you can reach out to me directly. You can ask questions. We can have great conversations. And more importantly, I really, really hope that I've earned your vote and that you will vote. Early voting is happening right now and ends November 4th. Gwinnett County does provide early voting on both weekends between now and then. And then the
Mhm.
last day to vote is November 8th. I urge you to vote early so we can help you if you run into any issues. And if you do, contact us. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet you, talk to you, let me come to your home and knock on your door. It
Cool,
has been a true privilege doing this work.
cool. And where can they find out what's your website and your social media
Right, right. So
address?
it's all the same. Ruwa, RUWA, the number 4, Georgia spelled out. So Ruwa for Georgia. And it's .com. It's every handle. I'm learning TikTok, so I'm making a fool of myself there, but trying to have fun. Um, so yeah, that's
All right.
that's
All right, cool. Hang in there with me while I just close out. Thank you, everyone, for being attending this podcast, listening to it on iHeart, Spotify, or watching it on Facebook or YouTube. You can find more of these types of podcasts either by searching Peachtree Corners Life on Apple or wherever you find podcasts, or by just liking our Facebook page, and which is Peachtree Corners Life, or our YouTube channel, which is Peachtree Corners Magazine. More, leave your comments. I'm sure Roman's team is monitoring things. So wherever you're at, if it's on Facebook and you want to leave a comment or a question, you can put it there, and they should get notified about that. Check out livinginpeachtreecorners.com for further stuff on Peachtree Corners, and southwestgwinnettemagazine.com as well. So we have two magazines. Hang in there. Thank you again for being